So you are our lone landed coronet. And the topic that was suggested was Baronial Investitures, since there was one down in Ravensfort this weekend. So the general topic is, cool moments during investitures, whether as a direct participant or as an audience witness. And I would love to hear any stories that you might be willing to share.
Well, I could start with ours.
Wonderful.
When we had been selected, we asked Finnegan if he would herald us into court.
Oh, wow.
Finnegan is an interesting person. He is a wonderful herald, a great bard, but he has that kind of dour Irish demeanor about him, and a ornery sense of humor. We talked to him about, our SCA lives a little bit and gave him some ideas on what we thought might be fun to include. And I included the fact that I had been a privateer on the Black Orchid and was becoming a landed baron. And how period is that? I mean, that really did happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when he came up with the script of what he was going to herald us into court with, brought it over for first reading, I was stunned. Basically, Dominique walks on water, and my only redeeming quality was that I married her. It was pretty scathing, in fact, and I was debating. I was like, I can't really have him say these things in front of the crown at my investiture. And Dominique and I talked it over, and I said, if we ask him to rewrite it, it's going to be the same old boring, thing that everybody does. So let's play with it instead. So while he was heralding us in and talking about, my rascalness, I guess you might say, I was in the back of court kind of pacing and looking peeved. And people were kind of worried about me. And when he finally finishes and we process in and get the cornets put on our heads and open our first court, our first order of business was to call him back in. And he had no idea we were doing this. He comes in and he kneels in front of us looking perplexed, not knowing why he was there. And we stood up and I started in. I said that, he had been hired to do one thing, and that was to make us look good, to make the king and queen feel like they made the right decision, and to fill the populace with confidence that we would be able to do the job, and how he had failed at that job to make us look good. About that point, I started wandering away from in front of him and expounding to the crowd, talking about how I didn't think that we could pay him the agreed upon wage for his services, since he hadn't really fulfilled the job, and that he should seek the person who dissuaded him from his true job and see if he can get them to pay him. And Dominique steps forward and pulls an ounce of silver out of her bra and hands it to him. The crowd went crazy, and I was like, huh, what? And went back over in front of him and dismissed him, said, now be gone and leave us. And he gets up and exits court. So that was how we were invested into being led.
That's wonderful. Is there that? I know that was a while back, but there were video cameras back then. Is there any VHS tapes of your investiture that you know of?
No.
Darn it.
It was years before I saw pictures of it. So no, we've only got a few pictures of it, in fact, and I think I'm pretty sure one of them is Finnegan kneeling in front of us too.
Oh, nice.
And it was a lot of fun to do that because it was a follow-up to Lucchese's stepping down. Mm-hmm. Lucchese had always had this dream of being carried out of court on a litter by a bunch of half-dressed, oiled-down men. So Dominique made that happen for his stepping down without him knowing it. She got a bunch of the young whelps from Wolfstar, and they oiled themselves down and carried a litter in to carry him out of court on. It was like a dream come true for him.
That's fantastic. If you guys were at Onstayora 25th, it was Sibri's coronation as well. And a group of centurions, shirtless, oiled down, carried her in on a litter, which is the only other time I've seen that done. But I can absolutely see Lucchese. I hope somebody handed him a palm frond to,
I didn't have the best view because I was at the back of court waiting to get called in.
Gotcha. Oh, that's magnificent. That was so
fun.
wonderful of her to do, to give him that moment.
Our stepping down, my brother Malachi made us disappear.
That's very cool. Was there smoke and flashes of fire and a dragon, or?
Nope.
No?
Nope. We just climbed into a box, and then the box was empty.
Did he make the new Baron and Baroness appear that way?
No. They processed in with their entourage and everything. We had already dismissed all of our guards and all of our entourage. It was just us still up there in court with their majesties, and we took the coronets off, and that's when he brought the box in, and we climbed into it and then disappeared.
That's cool. I really liked his, I'm not going to say wizard persona, because I think he really is, it's more than just a persona. It's very much the core of who he is.
Yes.
I was really touched when, was it Inman who said that he had wanted to make Malachi a laurel in prestidigitation? One of our guests had said it. And
that would have been nice.
he didn't.
He would not be the first one in the SCA, but he'd be the first one in Ansteorra.
Yeah. We've had a guest here. I'll have to see if I can find it. But one of our prior kings said that they were friendly with him, knew him, and was very impressed by the magic that he did and had wanted to make him a laurel, but he was concerned that it would cause problems in the circle because he was known to be friendly. Does that sound like it might have been Inman? It was one of our guests.
I don't know.
I don't recall.
Michael, it might have been Michael of Monmouthshire.
Michael, I could see that.
It was Michael. It was during the conversation I was having with him about his wiki page. It was Michael of Monmouthshire.
Malachi was at a Eldon Hill salon, and he was doing some tarot readings, and a fighter came up to him and wanted a blind tarot reading. Didn't tell him what his question was or anything. Malachi starts doing the reading and says, okay, your question's about your fighting. You're doing really well, and well, if you keep it up, you're going to become king. That was Michael, and the next crown tournament he won the first time.
Oh wow! Okay, I have to add that to his page.
So
that's
every time Michael was crowned after that, well, that time and every time after that, he made Malachi his court magician. Did you ever hear of the Sword in the Stone coronation of Michael?
Yes, I have a picture of it.
You have a picture of that?
Yes, I do.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
Hang on.
Sword in the Stone, Malachi and I built, and Michael was the only one who could release that sword from the stone. Every fighter in court tried to pull it out of the stone.
I'm going to link it in the chat. Michael has it on his wiki page. He loves it so much.
Awesome. I don't think Malachi knows about that either. So Yeah, that was it. So the fun part after that, of course, was Michael needed to have his lady appear.
Mm-hmm.
And they had done it all as a very Arthurian kind of theme. Malachi had come up and done the challenge, and all the fighters, who can draw this sword out of the stone can be king.
Mm-hmm.
Fighters tried it, and Michael comes in with this big parade. I mean, they had a Chinese dragon and everything. It was amazing.
Oh, wow.
And belly dancers and drummers, and he comes up and he pulls that thing out like it's coming out of butter. And as it clears the stone, a big flash of fire and smoke, and then he gets crowned, and then he challenges Malachi that he needs a lady, a queen by his side. Malachi does this motion like this, and a fireball flies from his hand, flies right between the thrones, explodes in a ball of fire, and there's Michaela standing there.
Oh, that's cool.
It was a lot of fun. It was really fun. Now, the fire from the stone, when he pulled the sword out, we tested the trigger mechanism right before court started. And because Michael wanted to verify one last time, he pulls the sword out and the glow plug lights, and it's like, okay, it works. And Michael grabs the sword and shoves it back in as Malachi and I both scream, no! And he ripped all the electronics out.
Oh, no.
5 minutes before court starts.
Oh, no.
We have the stone turned up on its side, and me in my best outfit am laying half inside it, rewiring it frantically. I got through and I said, well, it will work or it won't. There's no way to know. But it worked.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. I'm going to take just a second and add the information about the tarot reading. I
have a picture of Michael's first coronation at Camp Dakani. Actually, several pictures. Have you ever heard of the Order of the Motley Sash?
I've heard of it, but didn't it have to do with Foolery and court jesters and things like that, and Pippin was a member? Am I remembering correctly?
Close. It included them. It was basically performance stuff that really wasn't covered under normal performance stuff.
Okay.
Not bardcraft, not singing and storytelling, not dancing. And they included foolery and magic under it. And the principal members, they made two the first night, were Pippin and Malachi. And the sashes they were given were the legs from Pippin's old jester pants from the days of when he had no awards and just went around trying to raise money for Gatorade at the demos and stuff.
Mm-hmm. I've got to say, there's a guy in Namron who's doing really nifty foolery types of things. I got to see him in his garb, and he was doing a live performance at a Namron protectorate when Vladislav was crown prince. But he was all in red and gold. And I was impressed with how he was really dedicating himself to the performance aspect of it. Even wore the jester's hat with the bells everywhere, and I just really thought he was doing a good job. And I told him about what little I knew about the Molly Sash is that it had been involved with Pepin, and that Pepin had been this court fool that was very famous. And I didn't have a whole lot of stories to tell him, but he was very excited about that whole idea that art was recognized at some point in the past. I mean, it got homogenized into the Sable Thistle, but just that, that existed at one point was kind of special to him.
I don't think that they did more than maybe a half a dozen members of it.
There's a website for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's find out.
But there were several fools, and that's one of those things I love seeing. They're so much fun, and there's been some crazy ones. I told you the story of the one who got hit by lightning.
Yes, so there were a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Malachi and Pepin were made the same day back in 1992, and the last one that was given, there were 2 back in 2006.
Did Valentine get one?
No, it's Malachi Pepin, Puck One Shoe, William Worm, Raymond George
Wormy.
Demora, Brett McNelly, and Marquet de Hyatt.
Oh, I didn't realize Marquet got one. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pippin became a White Scarf, and I believe he's a Master of Defense now. Lives out in the West.
Puck, you mean?
I mean Puck, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Those
think.
names, now, Pippin is, see, Namron, when they, their rapier champions get a cloak, and they get a badge with the device of the Baroness who was on the seats when you were the champion. And I have one of 2 cloaks that have Pippin's device on it, because it was after Caitlin died while he was still sitting on the seat.
That's a nifty tradition. I like that.
Me too. I think they're fun.
So have any of you guys attended baronial investitures that stuck in your head that you remember fondly or have fun memories of, or just cool things you got to see?
Not here. Sorry.
No worries.
I've been to a lot of them, and to me, most of them kind of follow a set script.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand everybody wants to be kind of formal and regal about it and everything, but it's why I have a hard time remembering notable coronetings, just like coronations. Now, coronations are wonderful when you attend them, but a few years later, there's only a few of them that you actually remember in detail.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually because something strikingly different happened at it.
Yeah. My most recent, my current Baron and Baroness just stepped up this year at Castellan. And it's Jahan and Perrin.
Mm-hmm.
And they're good folks. And they did something that I really liked. And that was they talked about the other landeds being the example that they set. And they had their arms processed into court ahead of them. And their names read and remembered. And there was I don't think it was an actual song or anything, but just there was a procession of, from the founding Baron and Baroness, and then the next couple, and the next couple, all of the Barons and Baronesses before them. And during the entirety of their investiture court, those arms were displayed on either side of the court, 3 on each side, which I thought was a really nice, respectful way to include that history. Historian buff, yeah. I just really liked that, because a lot of the times they don't ever do that. There's no mention of the past, other than, you know, following in the fine tradition, yada yada. We're here to be awesome, you know. But I liked the fact that they made a tangible presence. I thought that was
seen it
cool.
happen a couple of times in baronial investitures. Seen it happen a couple of times in coronations also. For Michael's first coronation, they had the kids process in with all the shields of all the prior kings and queens of Onstayora. And I agree. I think that's a wonderful thing to see done. It's very much in the pomp and ceremony that we love anyway, with the shields and the banners and all that stuff. I remember Namron, I don't know if they still add to it, but at one point they had a song that was about all of the landeds of Namron. And it was first performed at a Namron and Baronial investiture. That might be something to ask the bards about if you don't have a cop, or if you haven't heard that.
Okay, one more time. Ask the bards of Namron about a song that was done about the.
It's a song or poem, I think song, that covers all of the landeds of Namron. It's like the history of the landeds of Namron.
Okay.
It was performed first time at a Namron investiture. It's been many years ago. I don't know if they kept it up and have added for the land since then. I hadn't thought of that one in a while. I think it's kind of fun what the former landeds do when landed steps down. They all gather and go up and escort him out of court.
I guess I'd probably seen that before, but never really paid as much attention as I should. But I did notice that in Jahan and Perrin's elevation and Bjorlik and Elizabeth step down. I thought that was a really nice touch, and that was the first time I kind of really saw it.
It's kind of a joke amongst the prior landeds. We call ourselves the Landless Trash.
Oh, I don't like that.
And so we go up there to welcome new members into it.
Somebody said that when I got my court barony. You can hear it in the audio of the recording. And it just made me so sad because you're not landless trash.
No, you're not.
You are still a noble of the kingdom of Onstayora. And I don't know. It just kind of bugs me. I can understand that it's a fond joke among those who have held that responsibility.
I definitely see what you mean, and I would never say that to somebody who wasn't a former landed. It's not meant to be cruel to those who weren't landed and got a court barony. It's kind of just a joke that we were barons and then we weren't. And now we're court.
But unfortunately, the phrase has been used enough that it's being used for people with court baronies because they never had lands, so they're extra landless.
No, and see, they got theirs for being awesome without having to serve on a throne. It's a lot of work to be landed.
Yeah.
Too. Don't get me wrong, it's a lot of fun. You kind of laugh a lot the first year because you're not used to people bowing to you.
Less laughter the second year?
Well, you start getting used to it.
Yeah.
So, I think Dami's first words after being invested were the funniest ones I ever heard.
What's that?
She's not real comfortable talking in front of crowds, and so becoming landed was a tough decision for her. And we got invested, and we opened our first court, and we stood up to this is before we called Finnegan back up. We stood up to address the populace, and the first thing out of her mouth was, "Oh my God."
Bless her heart.
Did
So-
you take a vacation from activities after you stepped down?
We didn't stop playing in the SCA, but we seriously curtailed it for about a year and a half, maybe
That's-
2 years.
That's one thing that I've noticed over the years is that the landed usually step back and disappear for a while. And for some reason in the steps, they tend to disappear.
That's not uncommon. It burns people out, and that is one of the biggest worries that I have of anybody becoming landed. You have to step back, because if you don't, you will burn out. If you push yourself until you can't take it anymore, you don't want to play anymore. The obligatory eventing is hard to do. It's expensive. You're supposed to be at every baronial investiture and every roundtable, and doing a 10-hour trip each way for a 1-hour meeting at roundtable really sucks. Being landed is wonderful. You can have a vision for your barony. You can lead your barony towards that vision. We did a lot of great and fun things as landed. But it's also really hard.
And I would think that would be true of any of the greater offices as well. And, not that I've ever held one, but you're kind of responsible for showing up for things that you may not feel like showing up to.
True. Now, the great offices of state are in their offices for about 2 years. The crown is normally in there for 6 months. It counted as 9 months as prince and princess added on to it. Landeds are usually in the 3 to 5 year range. It's a longer period of time, and it varies. I think Wiesenfeuer has had as short as 2.5 years, and I think our record is just shy of 5 years. Nick and I were second or third longest time on the baronial seats at just almost 4.5 years.
Didn't we figure out one meeting that Gwyneth had been in Baroness of Namron for something like 8 years?
Yes.
9
Yes.
years?
She holds the record, as far as I know, in Onstayora for the longest anybody sat on a baronial seat. I don't know how she did it, except it was a really different SCA back then. You didn't have round tables. You didn't have that obligatory eventing. Events were few and far between enough that you wanted to go to every possible event you could go to. And if that meant traveling 4 or 6 hours or more, you often did it, because there weren't 2 events on each weekend. There were only one. And so that's the event you went to if you were going to go to an event.
Gotcha.
But in the modern SCA and Ansteorra, most landed stay on the seat for somewhere between 3 to 5 years. And they usually step back for at least 1.5 to 2 years afterwards. Some of them don't ever really play at a heavy level again. And part of that's because the load of, you're always on. If you're at an event, you're always on. People come up to you with their woes on a regular basis. At our first Baronial championship in the middle of the Middle Eastern drumming and dancing competition, this one lady who'd been kicked out of her cabin by her cabin mates was interrupting Dominique trying to watch her championship dancing competition.
Oh dear.
So that she could help this lady deal with the fact that she'd been so mean to all of her cabin mates that they kicked her out of the cabin. You know, so there's little things like that that you have to deal with on a pretty constant basis too, and it gets tiring. So it's not strange that they want to take a break from it. Before becoming landed, Dami and I were doing 30 to 35 events a year is a pretty standard year. During the spring, summer, and fall, it was 3 to 4 weekends a month. As landed, we kept that up. Afterwards, we dropped back to about 5 or 6 events a year for a couple of years, and then started coming back into it again. That was a little hard for me after almost 3 years of not fighting very much, trying to get back into it. But it put me on a different focus too, so that helps.
Congratulations
interesting.
again, by the way.
Thank you. You
I've
too.
always heard that they take a step back to also allow the new Baron and Baroness to make it their own and not be tied to, the previous Baron and Baroness, so that they have time to make their own, not rules, but just to make their own barony in that.
Mhm.
And to get the people used to them, and that's why they kind of took a step back.
Yeah, Cassius and Kajira followed us on the Wiesenfeuer seats. And well, Bunny's been around as long as I have, if not maybe a couple of years longer. And Kajira's been around for a long time too. So we were pretty confident that they'd do a good job, and we were available for any questions or concerns they might have. But they pretty much took it and ran with it. They knew what they wanted to do also. Most people, when they're thinking about running for landed, you have to write a letter that says, this is why I think I'd be a good Baron and Baroness for your group. And you kind of have to be thinking about that. What things do you see the barony doing under your guidance?
Welcome, Your Excellency Jan. We're so glad you could be here tonight, as you are another person who has previously held a landed throne.
Well, yeah, but I'd need to have somebody explain all the rules now that you have to follow. I was in a spot of just make them as you go.
When did you sit on the baronial seat?
The end of Jonathan's reign, first reign as king of Onstayora, not as Ottenbelt.
Wow. Okay. That was before I started. I bet you were probably still on the seat when I started in 81 though, right?
Yeah, probably.
He stepped up November 1979 and stepped down July in 1983, and then was again in July of 1983 through July 1989. The first time he had a baroness. So held it for 10 years. So he beats Gwyneth. That might be the record then.
Well, I don't know. Simon might be up there on that too. He was around. But
it was really different. It must have been really different being landed back then, because you see people doing longer terms than what you do now.
well, part of it was what the need was. When I first joined, Bjornsborg was an incipient shire. And we had 2 barons. The Baron and Stargate hadn't been seen in a long time. and they got a second person in. But normally, when you got in a war like Bjornsburg, I mean, there were a bunch of little, you get a title for winning a tournament or a competition somewhere. And, I think the highest rank anybody had that was a real SCA wide rank was AOA. And when you got an award like an AOA, the Seneschal would get a letter from the kingdom, and they just announce it at a meeting or at an event, or just when there were people around. And here's a scroll. My AOA was one of the few that were given out during Jonathan Whitewolf's reign, because he basically stopped playing after Coronation. He and his wife had a big blow up at Coronation, and she tried to carry it on without him for a while and then gave up. The way that it's listed in the precedents, things are changed a little bit. Bjornsborg got our first Baron. The Seneschal came around to me and said, well, we're probably going to become a barony. Who do you want to have Baron? And I gave him a name. And she said, oh, no. That person's already said they don't want it. Why don't you vote for so-and-so like everybody else? And I said, because he's not any good as a leader, and said, thank you, and went away. And that was, it was who had the money to go to Phoenix and pay for the phone bills to Phoenix was kind of how things worked. It was, we were really the red-haired stepchildren of the kingdom way out here.
There was no such thing as free long distance back then.
Free long distance, no. Whenever you took a kingdom or principality office, you expected to get a huge phone bill. I was somewhat of an oddball because I would write letters. I'd go buy a couple of big rolls of stamps, and every month, every shire and barony would get a letter from me. I mean, I'd be copied off with maybe notes personalizing it to the local group. But I didn't want to run up a phone. I don't like telephones. I don't like electronic communications. I like face-to-face. And failing that, I'd put it in writing. That way there'd be no doubt about what I said, when or where, I did that with Earl Marshall. I did that with Kingdom MOAS. But you see, Onstayora wanted to become a recognized group. And we had 2 baronies. And the kingdom said, well, you can't become a region unless you have 3. And so it was hot set, that it'd be nice if we could have a 3rd barony. And of course, in those days, it wasn't $50 a year. $50 could be a lifetime membership. It was $3 a year. So it was, you got younger people, you got college students, you got guys starting out to work. $3 a year isn't that much of a thing. $50 a year, even considering inflation, is a little bit more of a burden for young folks nowadays. And it's changed the tenor of it. Anyway.
I really wanted to get one of those lifetime memberships when they used to offer them.
Well, then they came around and said, please give them back, because a lot of us, you see, and Ansteorra, became a region and then a principality, largely because Chorus was from Ansteorra, and I give it Deaton Claymore supported us. Deaton Claymore was a good king. He was king of Ottenbelt, but he held a crown tournament in Stargate. Actually, it was more nearer to Border March, but Border March wasn't really much in those days. And later on, Jonathan became king of Ottenbelt, and he wasn't real popular in Ottenbelt because he wasn't part of their. They thought it was a grand gesture at being inclusive to hold their crown tournament in Tucson. I was knighted at the first crown tournament that they had not held in Phoenix, the barony of Ottenbelt. They say Atenvelt. You see, I always insist on Ottenbelt. It became a thing. I'm a provincial from Onstayora, and I say Ottenbelt. They'd say Atenvelt. And so I'd go into court and I'd say, something about Ottenbelt, and then there'd be all the dwarves grumbling and this sort of stuff. And it was kind of a game I'd play with them, But I'm not really sure how Grey Raven, except he had rich parents. He was a student at Trinity University, and he made several trips out there, and he managed to get the seneschal and other shire officers removed by going out there and pleading his case. And anyway, we held a tournament of the Queen's Grace. And at that tournament, Bjornsborg was made a barony. And yeah, I was here, thought you were talking just about investitures, the whole realm of baron stuff, I could go on for too long. But, it was welcome because at the same time they proclaimed Ansteorra to be an official region of the kingdom, and the name was accepted. There had been a meeting, and there used to be a Polish restaurant in downtown San Antonio, and I was down at the restaurant, and as I was leaving, a bunch of people were coming in their SCA clothes, and I went, "Oh, hi there, and hi, Jan." And they were having I forget the name of it, but the petition that they got. Well, they had all gotten together, and that was where the name Onstayora had been coined. I think it was originally suggested by later on Baroness of the Steppes, Aurelian. She was the herald in Bjornsborg at the time. No, she was, she became regional and principality herald. But yeah, and they told me that they had a name for the region. That was where I first learned because I'd gone to dinner at the old Krakow, But Grey Raven, we really didn't have a barony here. We had kind of a new shire. And he had a bunch of college students at Trinity University paid their $3, and were down. And shortly after graduation, they all left because they were all seniors, and they went home, they went to jobs, and the barony went away to almost nothing. And we wound up with Gwyneth Sanquabar as Baroness, and how she became Baroness, I have no idea. Nobody ever had a, petition or whatever else. It was just, and Gwyneth's the new Baroness. And they got somebody to bless it, Then Robin of Gilwell's talked about that, the letter she wrote. She only really lasted a couple of months. And then she wrote it was very sad, a bitter little letter, about how, to tourney no longer inspires us and nobody dances anymore. And just kind of it sounded like a disenchanted newcomer, which basically she was, it was just kind of sad. And Grey Raven had left such a political mess. He just liked to mess with people. He just upset people greatly. And he rode the tide of Onstayora, wanted to become a recognized region, and then, barony, needed a barony. And Bjornsburg kind of sat for a long time. Part of what they attribute to Gwyneth of time, this is Gwyneth Sanquabar, not Gwyneth the Namrod, is just, she just wrote her letter and was put in the local newsletter and she disappeared. She just was gone too. And I'm not even going into the nasty parts. I'm just kind of giving the brief history of the time. And when they had the Inquisition during Jonathan's reign, what they decreed was that he couldn't make any more peers, and he had to have the next crown tournament as soon as possible and basically establish the new king at the tournament. Well, Jonathan, being a very intelligent person, I mean, he irritated a lot of people, but he was not bad intent, and he had a good mind. And he was somewhat of a pixie. He liked to pick at it. Said, well, they said I can't make a peer. That doesn't mean I can't make a baronial office. So at the crown tournament that Lloyd won, they called up Alexandra and me and made us Baron and Baroness. Alexandra was a member of the Niskaya Council, which was an all-female household, which I've mentioned before. And I was a member of House Thornwell, which had been banned from ever holding office or ever getting an award or ever anything in the barony of Bjornsburg ever again. It was, that was back during, and Ton the Traveler, you know, of course it was Appeal and Ton the Traveler. I've got, sometime you might like to see it, I've got that old Chronicles of Ottenbelt. Ton the Traveler is King of Ottenbelt, made a detailed pronouncement on the limitations of the powers of a baron. And it was due to that incident.
So did he have a formal investiture?
Well, he called us up and made us Baron and Baroness. That was investing us with the office.
Okay.
You see, the way things are done nowadays are, you know, and I'm not saying the good old days were great and the modern times are bad. There's a lot of stuff that's gotten a whole lot better. There's a lot of stuff that was really good that I miss that we don't have it anymore. You know, there's kind of a little bit of both in the mix. You know, if I ever sound like I lean too much one way or the other, try to understand I'm just talking about a issue at hand and not trying to expand too far with it. But yeah, I never had a, you know, what would be modern day considered an investiture. And part of it was like knighthood. It was part of, you know, the other aspects of knighthood were taken very seriously. And especially us being outliers in the kingdom. You know, when I joined, Meridies had become an independent kingdom, but everything else was Ottenbelt, you know, until you got to the Colorado River and the California border, you know. A big thing was a knight was supposed to speak the truth. If people, you know, would go to the king and complain that a knight told them a lie, a willful lie, that was a serious matter. The belted circle and everybody else took that seriously. A knight's word was supposed to be good. And the one ceremony that really stuck in Onstayora from old Ottenbelt was before a crown tournament, they would call up the people who were going to compete and the herald would read out a scroll with the requirements to be king. You know, you must do this, 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 and that, you know, and, you know, it included being a paid member and stuff like that, but none of this, show me your card before you can enter. It was, you know, knowing, you know, these are the requirements, and the king would sometimes add one of his own. You know, if you're going to fight in my crown tournament, I require this. And the knights, usually in order of the oldest knight first, Premier Chevalier, if he's fighting, would come up and declare that I will fight for the crown of Ottenbelt, and my belt and chain speak for me. And they go through the knights, and if anybody was fighting who was not a belted fighter, a knight would speak for them. I will speak for my squire. It was not, we're checking your membership card, can you really do this, and do you have a lady and this sort of thing. It was all, your honor, that settled it. A knight swore it before the king.
That's still done, by the way.
Yes.
That processing up and giving your oath, and if you're not a knight, so a knight has to speak for you. That's still being done.
I understand that. That goes back to our beginnings. But and as a matter of fact, nowadays, the making a peer. They didn't used to have all of the various people coming up and speaking for you. It was the knights decided, we've got a little too much clout. And it would be good to, recognize the equality of the different orders of peerage. And we invited, that when a person was to be made a laurel, a knight would speak for them, a pelican would speak for them. And it was usually very simply, Your Majesty, you've chosen well. This person is my peer and should be a peer of your realm. Words to that effect. This weekend they had, what's her name? Baroness
Tessa.
Tessa, yeah, old friend. And she had asked my lady to speak for her and stuff like that, because nowadays, what was it, 40th year? That poor lady, I'm glad that I was going to step in at yours if they had tried to do the same thing. They called her up, put her on her knees, and then had the people come up and make all their speeches. And she spent the whole time on her knees. In the old days, we had a thing about you don't kneel except, for being dubbed a knight and for sometimes being handed the appurtenances of rank. They'd have the kneeling pillows because they look cool, but the first thing a noble person would do in those times was not to walk up and drop to your knees before the king. There wasn't the same distance. We played an earlier period game, not the late period, not with all the entourage surrounding the thrones and stuff. This is the king with his friends, his companions. It was simple and dignified, to have the other orders of peerage speak for you. And it was usually one or two sentences, just an affirmation of yes, as and I've seen it nowadays, to where they'll have multiples of different orders, and they have a lion come up, and they have a lady of the rose come up, and all of them make a speech. I knew so-and-so when they first joined the society, and they were an awkward newcomer, and blah, blah, blah.
Guilty.
And they go on and on and on. That used to happen in the laurel circle or the pelican circle or the belted circle when they were discussing the person, not in court. The court was the king's business, and the focus was on the king, and the king welcoming, and they'd call up the members of the order, and it usually wasn't such a crowd like we get nowadays. That needs to be stage managed a little better from most of the ones I've seen. But it all went back to that simple, I speak for so-and-so, and if the person didn't have somebody to speak for them, then there was a question about this person and the king would take counsel, for fighting in crown tournament. And
I was honored. I was honored to have your lady speak for me at my elevation.
Well, yes, I mean, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm pointing out the difference.
Understood.
Yeah. Well, it's like when people take a squire or a protege, or, all this, very often you get people going into court, and again, they'll make a speech and they'll sometimes have their, person swear some kind of a oath of, bonding or whatever else. Going back to when I would take a squire, I usually wouldn't do it in court. I'd usually get the king just after court. And there is, again, what is Cisco Cifadades did a Ivo. He did a thing he was talking about, for newcomers, a little thing, and he was talking about the royal family. And I looked at what his talk was, and basically he was defining it as the crown prince and princess and the king and queen are the royal family, and we this, that, and the other. And largely due to will-o'-the-wisp, we had in the early days, and part of it was we didn't have, dukes and counts out the wazoo like you do these days. There were fewer, but the point was, if you had ruled Onstayora, you were part of the royal family. You were a royal cousin, whatever else. And there was attempts made to have the nobles who had ruled in Ansteorra. I remember there was a lady who had been queen in the East Kingdom, and she was a new queen. She had just become queen in Ansteorra. And it was up in Namron. I can go into more depth on I have too long a memory. And somebody introduced her to me. And I just told her, Ansteorra is different. And in those days, we really were, especially from like the East Kingdom.
Was that Margaret Nicanor?
I'm not sure.
She ruled in the East, and she hadn't been in the SCA for very long when she became Queen of the East. And then she moved here and was queen again a couple of years ago.
In any case, I remember it was at, the feast hall up in Namron, and I had talked to her, and she kept trying to kind of talk down to me.
Oh, then that wouldn't be Margaret.
Yeah, I don't think that's, this is, we're talking in the 80s.
Oh, okay. My apologies then.
I play a Polish noble. And in Poland, they have a saying that they have a concept of nobility that is more similar to, say, the Spanish hidalgo. You can be very poor, but still be noble. And, the poor noble sitting on the fence by his pigsty is the equal to the Duke in his palace. That is just the Polish attitude. When the country's invaded, you pick up your sword and defend. You're a noble. You're a peasant. Take the goods, take the cattle, go hide in the forest, make more peasants. That's good. That's your role. My job is to go live my life. That was the essence of what it meant. And it leads to a lot, who cares about Polish history? That's for campfires, not here. Well, this is kind of a campfire, but that's not what we're talking about. Yes. Anyway, she was, like, well, I know all there is to know about being queen. I've been queen of the East Kingdom. And there was a little bit of the implication that the East Kingdom really knows how to do it. And we are kind of these podunk hicks out here in Onstayora, and she's going to enlighten us. And I was sitting at the first row. They had a raised platform where, for the feast and court. And I was up in the first row. And part of, I think, to show, because she kind of came out and looked at me and said, this court needs a little lightening up. And she picked out 2 bottles of silly string and started spraying everybody. And maybe that crap flushes in the East Kingdom, and maybe that's fun, and maybe their courts needed lightening up. But that wasn't the way we did it in Ansteorra. There are things I miss about the old days, but there are, it just wasn't our style. And she started giving a war talk about some war we were having, and it sounded just like people talking about Penzic. And Ansteorra played wars, and Ansteorra played wars to the hilt. I mean, I could give stories, just for instances, and they were kind of marvelous things. But it was, I think, your topic last week where that I'm kind of talking to a little bit right here. But the investiture, the kings had a lot more power and a lot more presence. Court was not merely giving out awards. Most people nowadays, it feels like people are going there to see who's going to get an award. And I've heard the kings almost as a regular occurrence at the end of court saying, please fill out recommendations, we want to give award, and such an appeal doesn't belong. Court ought to be the dignity of the crown, representing the dignity of us, our kingdom. It ought to be the set aside the mundane for a while, and we are being courtly. I mean, maybe rude, maybe, it's a barbarian time, maybe you're a Viking, maybe you're an early Celt, so get your finger out of your nose, that's a king up there. You could play it on that level and it was appropriate. The question some people say about a lady should have somebody come and take her arm and lead her to court. That didn't used to be Ansteorra's style. It used to be everybody who was called into court was summoned. They would come up and then a herald would announce them. If it was a good herald, he'd get most of their titles. If nothing else, you get their main one, the big one, but that person would be announced into court. That person would be accompanied because it was their business that they were going up there. If that lady chose to have a lord with her, she would be announced and then accompanied by Duke so-and-so or whatever else. In that case, she had precedence because she was summoned by the king. That was kind of old style versus new style. And what I'm talking around here, I haven't lost investiture. When our current Baron and Baroness, had the investiture here, I sat back and it was just, I wish they'd talked to me. I could have made a much better, it's, really what it is whatever, if nowadays you have to write a letter, okay, I don't have a problem with that, and they have the requirements. I don't know events they have to attend. Okay, that didn't used to be required. I mean, you tended to do that anyway, you know, and I'm certain if somebody missed because they were sick or something, nobody did complain nowadays, you know. I mean, it's just, if you, you know, couldn't be present at times, you could appoint, you know, vicar. You know, that was a real common thing. But the ceremony itself was pretty much what the person taking the position wanted. Vargskol Halfblood and Shauna de Fraser in Bringalad wanted to go very late period. This was when the Legion of Swashbucklers was, you know, pushing, you know, what we now have as rapier combat, which is much superior to what they were doing as swashbucklers. Even though people might think there's no difference, oh, there's a huge difference, you know. It's not a subculture anymore. It's now part of the kingdom, you know. But he wanted, you know, he had a very late period event. When Mari replaced me, she started out playing as Elizabeth Daresby, well, in those days, they hadn't moved the dates for the SCA so far back. You know, it tended to be closer to the fall of Constantinople for the late period, you know, and that was part of what the battle was over. But she was an Elizabethan lady, much like I mentioned her earlier. Aurelian, you know, she started out as an Elizabethan lady and later on changed the persona to an earlier period persona because it really fit the Onstayoran style more. I mean, I love Namron. Namron was my second home. I mean, everybody up there was a personal friend, you know. I just was involved in, well, like that one story I wrote. You know, Bjorn Magnusson had the court and the weather just went all to hell and the king visited. You see, because in those days to have the king there was an honor. And that part of it came from, you know, if you had been a member for 3 years and had seen a king, you were lucky. You know, we had a crown tournament that was in, you know, Deaton Claymore allowed it. And when we had the Queen's Grace tournament, Deaton Claymore came out for that. You know, it was the one we refer to as the Queen's Ice because we had an ice storm. The thing is, the Ottenbelt Corps, they, you know, everybody in Ansteorra thought of them as being the sophisticated big city folks compared to us country folk. And it wasn't true at all. They looked upon themselves as the country cousins to the Kingdom of the West, you know, and a lot of their traditions are based on kind of a envy that way. You know, investitures, stepping, you know, nowadays they separate the old king's last court and the coronation of the new king. In the old days, and I'm talking like the first 4 to 6 reigns, you were kind of expected to have most of your business done by coronation. You know, it wasn't a last hurrah for the outgoing king. It was basically ceremoniously showing that there is an end. In the write-up I gave you about my coronation, I had the people who came up and swore personal fealty to me. That was the one bit of business I had at my last court, was I called up everybody who was in fealty to me and released them from fealty because it was personal fealty. I've never seen anybody do that again. Everybody that just feels like it goes up and swears fealty, and it becomes more and more meaningless because it's just so many people who have no commitment, nothing invested in it. And that's not to say I mean, there's a lot of folks who are it's deeply meaningful to be, and in the early days, being allowed to swear fealty was a big deal. The knights swore fealty. That was special to the knights. The landed baron and baronesses would swear fealty. That was special to their station. And the king could accept fealty from other people if he chose, or the queen. That was the standard. I allowed it at mine, which is kind of why I made a thing in the write-up, And the thing is, I didn't want to make it just they come up, get your moment on stage. It was come up and, okay, you've made a commitment, take their names down, and we gave them tasks. Am I boring? I'm wandering too far afield. I'm trying to stay on the subject a bit.
No, it's been interesting to kind of compare and contrast with how things have developed as there are now more knights and other peerages that and volumes of people that doing personal fealty. Because I remember from the 80s, personal fealty was a very big thing still.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, if everybody wanted to do personal fealty, the crown would spend 6 months doing personal fealties. Because
I went to Gabrielle's coronation. That was the first one I'd taken my youngest son to. And I had told him what to expect, but wow, I mean, they called up the Laurels to swear fealty. They called up the Pelicans to swear fealty. Mm-hmm. In the old days, that wasn't done, a group of Laurels might come forward and request permission to swear fealty. And it wouldn't be all of them. A lot of people didn't want to be. People used to take fealty real seriously. If you were in field, and also it was looked upon as a weight that, more could be demanded of you. There was a Otten custom that, thank heavens, didn't catch on in Onstayora, where people have a problem with the king and they'd walk out of court and just before the door stop and take off their chain and go out and slam the door, as a gesture of upset with the king. That was done far too often. Wow. And Lloyd and Jonathan and I, we weren't going to have any of that bullshit. We had a long heart-to-heart with the Belts and Circle. That's not going to happen in Onstayora. I don't care if we don't see you at an event for the rest of the reign. That kind of a gesture has no place here. You want to go away, go away. I'd seen that happen mostly in what is now the Outlands, but part of this was, Ansteorra, we had, and talk to Lloyd. I hope you can get to interview him sometime.
I'm trying to. I've been in communication with his lady. They've got a lot going on this month, but they're hoping that we can do it in October. And as soon as they give me a date in October, I will let you know, and I'll have you be the following weekend if you're available. And I'd really love to get those going.
But he is very crusty, very blunt, and very impassioned when he says something. But he is a doer. He is a leader. I never fought anybody that was as much fun as fighting him. He was like fighting a warrior for your life. You know, it was just a delight. And you know, Jonathan's reign was so beset by many things. And to be honest, Jonathan and Willow's longest suit is not their paperwork, you know. And Lloyd made sure that Onstayora had written laws put out in Jonathan's name, you know. You know, they were from the notes and stuff Jonathan had, you know, gathered and things like that. But he was the reason why we had so many masters at arms in this kingdom. If you talk to him, you know, about, you know, like, you know, again, sitting around drinking too much far into the night at events, you know, like, well, why did you become a master at arms? You know, and he'll just look at you and say, because all the knights I'd met at that point were scum. Just flat out, you know, there. And he made sure that he would live up to the ideal that he had of where it was coming from. And like, I hope you catch him because he comes to events in Oklahoma quite frequently. Freya Gerritsen, he was knighted at the Crown Tournament I won. And when he left the kingdom, he became a master at arms, because he would not swear fealty to any other kingdom but Ansteorra. This is part of the way we played it that was different. Somebody from the mid-realm would never do, oh yeah, I'll swear fealty here now. I'm, you know, it was you know, just part of the depth of the way we played the game. And he wanted to be a master at arms. Lloyd had long discussions with him and stuff, and you know, finally got him to decide, you know, how to go with it, because Lloyd had so much prestige, that being a master at arms had so much prestige, you know, because of him. And I'm not talking him up too much. I mean, he might offend you because he's very blunt, but he is a very important person, you know, for who Onstayora is. And if there's whatever's left that is special and unique about us, he's a big part of the reason for it being there.
I had an absolute glorious time chatting with him. He and I got to chat on Zoom for about an hour and a half. And he was just telling me stories of the old days and why he chose to be a master at arms. And he told me a little bit about the other masters at arms that he made, that he would be like, if that's what you want, you've got to fight me right now, here in court, go get your armor, you know, that kind of thing. He talked about some of the work that he did. He was very self-effacing about all of the work that he did with regards to codifying the rules and the laws of Onstayora, its award structure, things of that nature. He was very modest in our conversation about that. And I had a lovely time talking with his queen as well. I got to have a long, lovely chat with her. She's quite the character, and I wish more women of Onstayora, of the modern day Onstayoran women, knew about her and her stories. One of the ones that she told me was that when they started playing, they weren't here in Onstayora, they started elsewhere. But the knight marshal of that group was so offended at the idea of a woman taking up arms and doing heavy chivalric combat that he required her, as a condition of being allowed to take the field, that she had to take dance lessons, or she would not be allowed on the field, because he wanted to make sure that it was keeping balance, that, you know, she wouldn't become too masculine in, you know, in doing all of this combat, that it was endangering her femininity to take the field in such a way.
Days and principality days, women used to fight a lot more often. Of course, it wasn't so expensive to get armor in those days.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nowadays they kept upping the armor standards, and it just, you know, when I get newcomers showing up now, they've got a, you know, I mean, yeah, you can just go buy stuff nowadays, but it costs a lot. You know, Orm and I used to go to the junkyards and look at stuff and, well, what can we make out of that? You know, just get carbide cutting wheels, you know, and cut out things. We used to use refrigerator compressors, the units that contain that, real thick. They're bulletproof, you know, and we make tops of helmets out of those. You know, people cut them with a blowtorch, so you could sometimes find pieces that were almost usable with a lot of grinding, because they were trying to get the copper wire out of them, you know. But we just
Armor was very interesting back then. I will give it that. Freon helms, carpet beast armor, all kinds of funny
So one of the things in that giant box of newsletters that I got was a newcomer's guide to the SCA written by Lord William Blackfox, in which it described the different types of armor for different types of combat and how, you know, you just need to get some carpet and, you know, yeah, it went into all of those armor standards.
I've got a copy of that newcomer's guide. Isn't that the one that suggests for your first event, you could do like 2 terry cloth towels pinned at the shoulder with a belt?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen.
Yep.
I have, and I got them from Baron Alamandus, the Baron Steps, the first Baron of the Steps, and it's a bunch of their first newsletters, the Palantir, and one of them has the Knights Marshal, Lord Chorus Netterhelm, telling people, unfortunately, you can no longer spar using the 3 weapons fencing masts. You know, we've got to get helmets of some sort, you know.
Yeah, I got a bunch of Steps newsletters from when Robin was the Baron of Steps that were donated to me this weekend. So I've been going through those and reading through them. And there's a beautiful portrait by Bronwyn O'Bralligan of Lloyd on the cover of one of them.
Okay, yeah, I think I've got that one too.
Do you have the one that, any of the ones that included the mustache wars?
I don't know, but I do have a write-up on the wiki about it that was put together.
It was very entertaining.
More about that would be absolutely welcome if you wanted to read the page and see if you had anything to add.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm going to be parceling those out. I've got a bunch of bare necessities for Bjornsborg.
okay.
And I'm going to reach out to your current Baron and Baroness to see if they want them because they're from the 80s.
Okay. You might talk to my lady about the mustache wars too. She was involved with those.
Okay.
This was back before she met me or talked with me. She had seen me from afar, I guess.
I loved how all the slogans for mustaches, and it just seems like they had mustache shaped cookies, and I mean, they really went deep into the theme.
And many of the women had paint on mustaches.
I forgot about that.
Oh, how fun. So have you ever attended a baronial investiture that you were completely impressed with, that you enjoyed the pageantry of?
Let me see. I told you about Jonathan's first coronation, which I was impressed with up in Namron, the King of Ottenbelt. But that's not a baronial investiture.
I have to say that I've seen a lot more variety in stepping down than in stepping up.
Yeah, I remember at Jonathan's coronation, the prince and princess died of the plague, and they had Tyvar come up in a Commedia dell'arte demon outfit to guide them off,
Oh, wow. Oh, so there's a tradition that was done, I've seen done at a couple baronial elevations, and I'm wondering how old the tradition is. The crown presented the new Baron and Baroness with a box of earth from all of the different subgroups of the barony, all of the different regions of the barony, and said, I am entrusting you with the lands that are contained herein, and gave them this physical symbol of their group. Is that a tradition that goes back fairly far, or is that somewhat new? Or
I would not call it a tradition, but I saw it done. I think it was in Stargate, but I'm not certain of that.
okay.
I've seen it a couple of times, but that's it. It's not very common.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like it. I thought that was really cool.
Oh yeah, well, any dramatic, court ought to have more to do with the drama, and because medieval courts did. This is the way you display things to people. You don't have the internet, you don't have television and radio. You'd go up and act out the roles, and you make sure the king is the one deferred to, but you don't, so much of the precedence and things was important because it was important to the functioning of society. I remember a baronial coronation in Alberon, but that's not Onstayora, so I won't go to that one.
Did it have cool elements?
Well,
I have family in Alberon, which is why I'm curious.
yeah, I think it was Theo stepping in.
Okay.
And Theo was the guy who was king of Ottenbelt when we became a kingdom. He's the one who I gave my fealty back to swear fealty to Ansteorra. Well, I knew him from before that, but part of it was that the hall would be lit only by candlelight. So a lot of the mundanities fade into the background.
Yeah, we're just not allowed to do that legally anymore.
Were quiet. There would be a hush. A person who could speak well could be heard. The king didn't have to call down the people in the back and the tables talking, who never did stop talking. There would be moments of that you didn't have to squint and lean too far to feel like something real's happening here. There's real emotion. There's, this is symbols, but they're symbols of something deeper. And that can be caught. My Baroness didn't even have a stepping down, court or anything. That was a thing. And it was done in the old days. I just didn't believe in it, having a final court, because it takes away from the new people coming in. It should be their event. It should be all focused on them. If you have tidying up business, like when I stopped being king, when I stopped being Baron, I basically wrote a letter to the king, wrote a letter to the barony, had it read at the baronial meeting, and I didn't even attend the next event or the investiture. I kind of felt like, if a person stops being Baron, they're either dead or in disgrace, or just missing. And I thought that the emptiness, though we don't have somebody on the chair, and that it is filled during the event, was a better event. That's my reasoning anyway.
Mhm.
When I stepped down being king, Kemerith just stood up and said, "By your leave, my lord," took off her crown, put it on the chair. I don't think she handed it to me. I think she just put it on the chair because we wanted to emphasize she ruled in her own right. She didn't get it from, I crowned her, but it, was by her own right. She was queen. And I said a very simple farewell and left too. On the other hand, Sigmund, and I'm talking royal rather than baronial, but it's the same thing. He totally upstaged the person following him.
How so?
Well, Sigmund, and I hope you talk to him too, because he's an interesting person, and he has a lot of detractors and a lot of people who worship at his shrine. And he's his style is nowhere near my style. He's got a different style, but he respects me a lot, and I respect him a lot. He's a man of great depth. But he told me, "You got to watch my stepping down." This is C.B. DeMille. He planned the one with the 9 worthies at the 25th year thing. I played Hector in that. The 25th year SCA gathering that they had at the Texas Ren Fireside. In any case, he had this thing, and he had the hall go dark. And he had been studying to play the lute. And he and his lady sang opera. I mean, they're, musicians. Mistress Sabia is, lived with them. They're very musical people, and he'd say, Yolo plays a lute like a banjo. He needs to learn how to play a lute properly. And I say, "Oh yeah, show me." And he says, "Well, I can't, I'm just learning," But he sat there and he tried playing something. Oh yeah. And he picked up, like I had described, the one where Jonathan came in and the old king stepped down and stuff. He was sitting there alone, and they darkened the hall, and they had like a spotlight on the throne. And he was there with Pepin, the fool, at his feet. And he attempted to play the lute and, did something maudlin, and he had a discussion with the fool about the nature of kingship. And he had the fool teach him. And he just got up, left the throne, left the crown behind, and put on a cloak and put his arm around the fool. And he had a bad foot at the time, and he limped down the hall with a staff and the other arm around the fool. And the hall, just after he left, started chanting his name. I mean, people who disliked him greatly were chanting, "Sigmund, Sigmund." It was just, really a moment. And my opinion, it detracted from the coronation to follow. I mean, they raised the lights and left some time. And when Sigmund came in to accept being a Jarl, you know, he got big cheers coming in, but it was well done. I have to admire that. But to me, he shouldn't have upstaged his, you know, descendant there. But Sigmund knows how to make a good stage production. And it was really a noteworthy moment. I mean, he had the hall. You know, people were.
It sounds beautiful. Now, I've heard that one of the crowns, was it Sigmund that walked out with someone singing the burden of the crown?
The burden of the crown was originally written and performed by Baldwin of Erebor. And I think that was chorus, but it was not uncommon in Ottenbelt to have at the coronation or the crown prince to be there and to call in Baldwin and do this as a lesson to his heir, you know, and perform it that way.
I thought that I had heard a story about an Onstayoran crown, either a royal crown or a baronial coronet, walking out with Pepin, as Pepin, or Pepin was sitting at the base of the throne and was playing it.
Okay. Well, the burden of the crown, I don't think was used at Sigmund's, which is as I described it. And you can talk to him, bring it up, because he can probably give you more in detail about the planning. He's still there, and you can, he probably would welcome somebody contacting him. He's pretty much alone. His lady dying drained a lot out of him.
I don't know how to connect with him. If you would be willing to help facilitate that, or your lady would be willing to help facilitate that, I would.
Okay, I've got a phone number and I've got I think an email address.
Okay, that would be wonderful.
I can get that to you.
Thank you.
He had been having a New Year's Eve gathering at his house, and a lot of old timers show up: Dinar, Hector, and Rowan, you know, and newer people, you know, from around the area. And I went by his place. His house is, you know, sound like the Addams Family, is a museum. He is a collector. He has got precious items from all over the world, and he has to rotate the displays because he can't put them all out all the time. You know, he's a peculiar fellow, and he was a more skilled fighter than most people appreciate. I mean, look at the people who he taught, you know. I mean, he was, he's not the bombastic sort of egoist that you see in so many of the Duke class and SCA people. But he has a strong sense of self, but any warrior is going to have that. And in some cases it's irritating, some cases it's not. I mean, you talk to Lloyd, and yes, he's self-effacing, but there's a strength in him you can tell right off, you know. Like I say, Jonathan had that. You know, Jonathan irritated a lot of people by his manner, but Jonathan was a man of substance, and he was centered and strong. You know, Sigmund, you can say the same for. You know, that's the essence of excelling at combatives. You know, you're imposing your will on another person physically. And in the SCA, it puts the dimension of honor is involved, your personal honor. It's not just win. It's what takes it beyond sportsmanship, you know. There is that level. And there are plenty of dukes who have never been anything but sportsmen, but I've written stuff, you've seen some of that, you know what I'm talking about there. And if I can digress, Sigmund was king, and I don't know if it was his first or second reign, but there was a feast in Stargate that I happened to be attending. And John the Plain of Shern, who was the first person knighted after we became a kingdom, had studied Gufu. And I had noticed in the newsletter, he would teach people tiger tail spear work. And at the, in those days, the feast would be, before the head table, there would always be entertainers, and there'd be dancers, and there'd be things going on constantly. Nowadays it tends to be lined up, we tend to be much more crowded and lined up like a chow hall, but there was that going on. And John the Plain came out and gave a spear set, what the Japanese would call a kata. And I had been sitting at the head table and being served. Sigmund collects good wines, and he, I'd been having a bit of it, and he did that, and I went, well, gee, that can't go unanswered. So I got up and I borrowed the king's sword, not the sword of state, but the king's sword. And there was a form I had learned from a student of Wong Ok Yoi that I had taught my daughter. At her school, she needed to get a PE requirement, and she, for some reason, she couldn't take, the regular PE program. So they just said, find a physical activity for her to do. So I taught her this form, the set, and it was, it's actually beginner set number 1, but for Westerners, they called it the continuous and returning thunder sword, which sounds cool. But it was continuous and returning because you go to the start and you can actually keep going. You can just do it with no end. There's a start and an end, but the end flows right into what was the first move. Anyway, I got up and went through it twice. Once very slowly, kind of to show what the moves were, and then once fast. I mean, not terribly fast because I was using a sharp sword, and I was in a hall. So I was, but I did it more quickly so you get the feel of it as a real sword move, not just an exercise. And people, and then Sigmund, not to be outdone, he had studied, well, he has got a lot of stuff from Japan. He came out and showed some basic Japanese sword, because he got a katana out there. And we wound up having people who had studied martial arts. Part of the entertainment at the feast was, doing martial exercises, which is not unrealistic, for a medieval setting, especially if you're going earlier period, it's not quite Hamlet dueling Laertes, but.
You mentioned John the Plain of Shern.
Yes.
And I received a package recently from Lady Marsali Fox, who was his spouse. And she sent me an original Black Fox of that was done for their engagement.
Cool.
Of Marsali and John the Plain.
Somewhere in my garage, I've got it was a cheaply made, but it was a battle axe he had. And he just, after I did the form, he came up and smiled and gave that to me and said, "You did well." You know, he says, "This is no good for cutting things, but it breaks things really good. You can, you know, do firewood with it." And John the Plain was a nice man. He was a nice fellow. You know, he was not a greatly skilled fighter, but he wasn't, you know, I mean, he was worthy of being a knight. And, you know, again, I don't think there's anybody in the SCA who doesn't have somebody annoyed with them and somebody who loves them. You know, I liked him, you know, I mean, I wouldn't have been opposed to drinking too much at a campfire with him, you know.
That's a good measuring stick.
Yeah.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. Rowanna's departure reminded me to check the time, and it's nearly the 9 o'clock hour. So if there are any other stories that folks want to share about baronial investitures, or the burden of being a baron, or one of the joys of leading a local group, I would love to hear that. We'll end on our official topic.
One of my favorite experiences being landed baron was giving out awards to people. It was always fun to see the surprise, the look on their face. We had this one gentleman who was very socially awkward, but he was very eager. He always wanted to help. He was always, anytime you saw him at an event, he was always trying to find something to do, or he was doing something. But he was extremely socially awkward and had a hard time talking to people. And so he kind of got overlooked. And we had noticed that. And so we put him in for an AOA. He'd been in the SCA for at least 4 years by that point. And when we gave him his, we were given the privilege of actually giving the award of arms to him, and the surprise and the look of joy on his face. And oh, it was years after that. Every time we would see him, we would greet him with the title Lord, and he would just start glowing again. And that, you know, to see something bring joy to somebody like that, it was a lot of fun.
Thank you for the reminder. I need to paint some more Award of Arms charters. They are my favorite thing to paint.
I still remember my AOA. I'd been in the SCA for 8 years before I got my AOA. And it still was one of the most special things that I think ever happened to me.
I think I've told the story of me getting mine a couple of times here, with what I put poor Miguel and Connell through, because I'd never been to a court, had no idea what to do. I just knew that you had to curtsy and kneel, and at no point did I know at what time I was allowed to stand back up. And so there's a picture of him trying to present me as the newest lady of Onstayora, and I'm still on the ground bowing, and he's like, no, it's okay. Bless his heart. He was so kind. Yeah, but I think those moments stay with you.
Yep, mine was at a Beltane with Gerard and Vanessa.
Oh wow, that was a while back.
89.
He lives up in Chamonix now, I believe. He ordered a Triumph Eternity box for last year's virtual event, and I was doing deliveries of boxes, and I got to meet him for the first time. I had never met him, so that was kind of cool.
I was so shy back there. Back then, I couldn't say thank you out loud when I got my AOA.
Being a landed probably was a whole new skill set that you had to develop.
It was because I would never have even put my name in for it. And back in my early days in the SCA, if you had told me that I would be landed and speaking in front of the populace in court, I would have laughed, because there's just no way I would have done that. What opened me up was shooting in archery tournaments, and I'd win, so I'd have to come up in court to get the prize, and then because I won, I had to come back next year and run the archery tournament. So, you know, doing that several times, I started getting more comfortable speaking in front of people, because I didn't have a choice. If I was going to shoot, I had to be able to do that.
Very cool. Well, thank you everybody for your stories tonight. I appreciate it. I know you always worry, Jan, about going far afield, but I love where the threads take us. So I appreciate all of the stories that you're willing to share and all the different topics we got to cover. So thank you.
Don't repeat myself too often.
But
It's
it makes
okay.
me remember so many other fun stories as you're talking about the people. It's like,
Yeah.
I remember when they did this and when they did that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I can get Lloyd and Joycelyn to come and tell us stories of their reign. I'm really hoping that happens. We'll see. They said that their September was a little unreasonable, but they're going to try for October. So we'll see. As one of the people that I'm hoping to do a specific reign interview with, would it be helpful for you to have a list of questions in advance that I'm going to be asking folks so that you can think about them, or do you just...
I'm a brainstorming kind of person, and yeah, if I had a list, I probably in the morning just before I step out of bed, start getting ideas, you know. So
okay, then I will see if I can work up a list of questions. I don't have one prepared yet, but I'll ask for advice from the populace as to what they would like to hear stories about, and see if I can create a standard list of questions for each reign interview. So I will follow up with you on that. And on that note, I will bid you all good night, and thank you again for coming and joining us and sharing your stories and your visions of the past and your perspectives. I appreciate it. Have a good evening, all.
Good night.
Thanks, Data.